The palace lights flickered like fading candles in the fog that wrapped around Windsor that night. Inside those ancient walls, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed. Muffled whispers carried secrets too heavy for marble halls. And then, just as dawn broke, a single envelope appeared on Princess Anne's desk. It was sealed in deep crimson wax, bearing her father's royal insignia. The contents, she would soon learn, would shake the monarchy to its very core. But before that letter was opened, the world was still pretending everything was fine. Cameras showed smiling faces, polished tiaras, and carefully crafted statements from Buckingham Palace insisting that King Charles was resting comfortably. Yet behind those gold-framed portraits and stiff smiles, panic had already set in. The king's health had begun to deteriorate faster than anyone dared admit. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What no one knew, not even Prince William or Prince Harry, was that Charles had already written his final wish. And that wish was nothing short of explosive. Let me ask you something. What would you do if the one man who built your destiny also tore it apart with a single sentence? Because that's exactly what Princess Anne faced when she unfolded that letter. Words that would upend her brother's legacy and force her to make a choice between loyalty and truth. And, known for her stoic composure and her fierce commitment to duty, had seen everything. Scandal, betrayal, grief, but never this. The king's words weren't instructions for the future of the crown. They were a test, a challenge that could destroy the monarchy from within. And at its heart was a name she never expected to see, Harry. For years, the royal family had buried their fractures under the weight of ceremony. Publicly united, privately broken. William, the dutiful heir. Harry, the rebellious son. Meghan, the outsider blamed for tearing them apart. But now, as Charles lay ill in his private residence, one shocking truth had emerged. His final wish wasn't for William, the future king, or even Anne, his most trusted confidant. It was for Harry. Only this time, the wish came with conditions so controversial that even Anne hesitated to read them aloud. The king's final words, written in his familiar slanted script, carried both love and a deep ache of disappointment. If my youngest son wishes to redeem his place in this family, he must return to his homeland, it read. But he must come alone. Those 5 words, he must come alone, rattled Anne's chest like a silent thunderclap. Alone, meaning without Meghan. And reread the line, her hands trembling. The ink had bled slightly at the edges, as if written in haste or emotion. The king's intention was clear. He wanted Harry to return home, to step back into the royal fold, and to take on something extraordinary. Something no one had seen coming. But it came with an impossible price, to leave the woman he'd sacrificed everything for. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why would King Charles, a man known for his patience and diplomacy, demand something so cruel? Why, after years of heartbreak and reconciliation attempts, would he ask his son to make the ultimate personal sacrifice? Was it duty, desperation, or something far deeper? A final attempt to repair the damage between 2 sons before it was too late? The truth, as Anne would later confess, wasn't black and white. Inside that sealed letter was more than a father's final wish. It was a plea for the survival of the monarchy. The king believed the crown had reached a breaking point. The public's trust was fading, the institution's image was crumbling, and scandals were outpacing ceremonies. In his mind, only one person could restore faith in the monarchy. Not William, who the world saw as the perfect heir, but Harry, the one who'd lived among the people, suffered under scrutiny, and learned humility outside the palace walls. It was a gamble that risked everything. But Charles had made his choice. And as Anne stared at those words, she realized something chilling. The king's wish wasn't just about the future, it was about redemption. His son's, and perhaps even Diana's. Because deep down, Charles knew something everyone else had refused to acknowledge. His reign had always been haunted by ghosts. The ghost of Diana's compassion. The ghost of public judgment. The ghost of a fractured family pretending to be whole. And the ever-practical sister who never chased headlines or glory suddenly carried the heaviest burden of her life. How do you tell your brothers that their father's final wish will turn them against each other once more? How do you explain to the world that the king wanted to rewrite the monarchy's destiny with the one man it had already exiled? But she couldn't hide it forever. The first sign came quietly. A cancelled royal engagement. A discreet convoy leaving Windsor at midnight. Then whispers began to leak. Princess and holding a confidential family meeting. Private discussion regarding succession. William furious behind palace doors. And the press, always hungry for scandal, smelled blood. What made this moment even more staggering was timing. The king's health reports had grown more alarming by the day. Treatments delayed. Doctors summoned in secrecy. The man who had waited a lifetime for the throne was now fighting a race against time to keep his family, and the monarchy, from imploding. Asin looked out from her window at the flood of reporters gathering by the palace gates. One question kept echoing in her mind. Had she waited too long to tell the truth? Because Harry was thousands of miles away, living a life that felt worlds apart from the one he'd left behind. The California sunshine. The Hollywood parties. The carefully managed interviews that spoke of healing but hinted at bitterness. The royal family had become a ghost story to him, something he once believed in but no longer recognized. Yet across the ocean, his father's final words had named him as the crown's unlikely savior. Imagine the weight of that. The boy once branded the spare, being chosen to inherit everything. The crown, the responsibility, the legacy, on one impossible condition. He must cut ties with the woman who defined his rebellion. The irony was almost too cruel to believe. Even Anne, who prided herself on following royal protocol to the letter, could feel her father's desperation in those final sentences. This wasn't about politics or preference. It was about survival. Charles had seen something no one else dared say out loud. The people no longer trusted the perfect image. They wanted authenticity, even if it came from imperfection. They wanted a monarch who'd lived through pain, who'd made mistakes, who could speak their language. And as much as William embodied duty, Harry embodied humanity. Still, that didn't make it easier to deliver the news. Anne's decision to reveal the letter didn't come lightly. For weeks, she agonized. She met with advisors, spoke privately with William, even consulted with Camilla. Every conversation ended in argument. Some begged her to burn the letter, to protect the monarchy's image. Others urged her to release it, to honor the king's truth before it was too late. In the end, it wasn't the politics or the pressure that decided it. It was something much simpler, a promise, and had promised her father she would not let his last words fade into silence. And so, in one quiet moment of resolve, she stepped in front of the cameras, her expression pale but steady, and said only one line that would send shockwaves through Britain. "It is time the public knows what my father truly wished for." Reporters shouted questions, flashes went off, chaos erupted, but and didn't waver. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the folded letter, and raised it slightly, her voice breaking just enough to sound human again. What he wanted, she said, was not for one son to rule, but for both to be redeemed. And with that, she turned and walked back into the palace, leaving the world to wonder what those words meant. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was the calm before a storm. Within hours, headlines ignited across every platform. Princess and reveals king's secret wish. Charles names Harry as successor. Monarchy in crisis. The speculation was instant, unstoppable. But inside the palace, the real tension had only just begun. William's reaction was explosive. He felt blindsided, humiliated, betrayed by both his aunt and his father's hidden decision. His fury wasn't just about losing the crown, it was about losing control. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Harry was woken by his phone vibrating relentlessly. Unknown numbers. Private calls. Texts from old friends and journalists. When he finally answered one call, his voice was groggy, almost detached, until he heard Anne's voice on the other end. "Harry," she said softly, "it's about your father." The words hung heavy, sinking deeper than any tabloid headline could, because Harry knew what those 5 words usually meant. Loss, farewell, regret. But not this time. This time, it meant something even more complicated. And wasn't calling to say goodbye. She was calling to hand him the impossible choice of a lifetime. Return to the kingdom that exiled him, or stay with the woman who made him feel free. And as that truth began to settle in, Harry's face reportedly turned pale. Because what Anne told him next wasn't just about duty or love. It was about destiny. The king's final wish had named him the future of the monarchy, but only if he severed the very bond that defined his rebellion. No one could have predicted what would come next. Not William, not Meghan, not even in herself. Because that single revelation would ignite a chain reaction no royal could contain. And when the dust settled, the world would no longer ask who deserved the crown. They would ask who could survive it. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The corridors of Balmoral Castle were quieter than they had ever been. Not even the ticking of the grandfather clock dared break the tension. The staff moved like ghosts, their faces pale with exhaustion and fear, as if even a whisper could carry too far. Behind the heavy oak door of the king's private quarters, time seemed suspended between one breath and the next. Outside, the Scottish fog rolled across the fields like a mourning shroud, wrapping the castle in its cold, suffocating embrace. Inside, Princess Anne sat motionless beside her brother's bed, her hands folded neatly on her lap, her expression unreadable. For the first time in her 74 years, she looked tired, not from duty, but from the unbearable weight of what she knew. Charles's breathing was shallow, his once firm voice reduced to a fragile rasp. On the bedside table lay a single object, a sealed envelope, the same deep crimson wax that Anne had seen before. She didn't need to open it to know what it contained. Another copy of the letter, written by the king himself, his final attempt to make peace with his legacy. "Rest, Charles," she whispered, her voice catching slightly. "You've done enough." But he stirred, his eyelids fluttering. "No, and not yet. There's still one thing left to be done." And leaned forward. "You've already said what needed saying, Charles. Let it rest." He shook his head weakly. "They'll destroy each other if someone doesn't intervene. I won't leave this world knowing the crown will fall into chaos." She looked at him for a long moment, trying to find the words that would ease his torment. "You've done what you could. You raised them to be men of conviction. That's all a father can do." But Charles smiled faintly, a bitter, knowing smile. "Conviction, yes. But conviction without compassion is a crown without a heart." Those words lingered, heavy and unanswerable, and knew then that her brother wasn't clinging to life for himself. He was clinging to it for the monarchy, for the sons who had become strangers, for the country that had turned its royal family into living relics. She glanced at the crimson seal again. It was marked with the royal crest, but the ink beneath it was darker than usual, smudged in places. He must have written it himself, late at night, when no one was watching. It was the last act of a king desperate to control what came after him. Outside the window, the faint hum of engines signaled the arrival of someone important. The press? A courier? Anne's heart tightened. She couldn't bear another leak, another headline dissecting her brother's frailty. The palace was supposed to be a sanctuary, but lately, it felt like a stage where every gesture was dissected for entertainment. She rose from her chair, her knees stiff, and pulled the curtain aside. Through the glass, she caught sight of two vehicles approaching, unmarked, discreet, but unmistakably government. One of them carried the Prime Minister's private secretary. The other was a physician Anne hadn't seen before. "Already?" she murmured under her breath. "They're preparing the formalities." Charles's eyes opened again, just enough to catch the edge of her sorrow. "Don't let them turn this into protocol," he whispered. "Promise me, Anne." "I promise," she said softly. "I'll keep your words safe." He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers brushing hers. "It's not my words that matter anymore. It's theirs." He meant William and Harry. Even now, on the edge of mortality, Charles couldn't stop thinking like a father. The wounds between his sons had cut deeper than any scandal. William's resentment, Harry's defiance, the tension that had turned every family gathering into a Cold War. And yet, despite everything, Charles had never stopped believing that his sons could fix what he could not, and could feel her throat tightening. "You've made your choice clear," she said carefully. "But it won't be easy." He gave a faint smile. "Nothing worth saving ever is." A silence followed, not empty, but thick, heavy with things neither of them dared say aloud. And wanted to ask him why Harry. Why not William, the dutiful heir? Why not the son who had spent his entire life preparing for the crown? But deep down, she already knew the answer. William was the perfect monarch on paper. Harry was the one who might actually connect with the people. And in the end, Charles had always been a man of sentiment, not strategy. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. The door creaked open and the queen consort stepped in, her expression carefully composed, though her eyes betrayed the exhaustion she'd been hiding from the cameras. "How is he?" Camilla asked in a voice barely above a whisper, and didn't turn. "He's still himself, stubborn as ever." Camilla forced a faint smile. "He always was, even when he shouldn't be," and finally faced her, her tone polite but cold. The tension between the two women was no secret. "You knew about the letter, didn't you?" Camilla froze for half a second. "He confided in me, yes. But he said you would be the one to act on it," and crossed her arms. "Because he knew I'd do what needed to be done." Camilla's gaze sharpened. "You mean reveal it?" "I mean honor it, and correct it." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was sharp enough to cut. Outside, the sound of distant church bells carried through the mist, solemn and haunting. Camilla stepped closer to the bed and placed her hand gently on Charles's arm. "You've done enough worrying for a lifetime, darling," she murmured. "It's time to let go." Anne's jaw tightened. "He'll let go when he's ready." Camilla's eyes flickered toward her, but she said nothing more. She turned and left the room as quietly as she'd entered, her perfume lingering like an afterthought. The door clicked shut behind her, and the silence returned. And sat again, her hands trembling slightly now. She looked down at the sealed envelope. In her mind, she could already see the headlines if she revealed it. Shock, outrage, endless speculation. But if she didn't, the truth would die with him, and history would twist his legacy into whatever narrative the press desired. Hours passed. The fog thickened. The light outside turned from gray to amber, and then to black. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting pillows, whispering softly to each other. But Anne never left her seat. She couldn't, not while the king's hand still twitched, searching for hers in the dark. Sometime after midnight, Charles stirred again. His voice was barely audible now. "Tell them, it wasn't about power," he whispered. "It was about peace." "I'll tell them," she promised. He managed a faint nod, then drifted into uneasy sleep, and stayed where she was, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. The fire in the corner crackled softly, casting long shadows that danced across the portraits on the wall. Their ancestors stared down at her with hollow eyes. Kings and queens who had ruled through war, loss, and scandal. Every one of them had carried secrets, but none had left one quite like this. By dawn, the news of the king's worsening condition had leaked. Reporters gathered at the castle gates, their breath turning to mist in the cold morning air. Helicopters circled above, and didn't need to look outside to know what they were saying. The monarchy stood on the edge once again. But inside that room, it wasn't a crown at stake. It was a family. And reached for the envelope one last time. Her thumb traced the edge of the wax seal. The temptation to open it burned inside her, but she hesitated. Once it was opened, there would be no turning back. The moment the world learned what Charles had written, nothing would ever be the same. She pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. "You've left me no choice, Charles," she whispered. "But I'll do this on my terms." As she stood, the sound of distant footsteps approached. The door opened slowly, and a familiar voice called softly, "Aunt Anne." She turned. It was Prince William. His face was drawn, his eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. Behind him, a royal aide waited nervously. "He's resting," and said quickly, her tone firm. "I came to see him," William said, stepping closer. "They told me it might be soon," and looked at him for a long moment. There was something in his eyes she hadn't seen in years, fear. Beneath the carefully polished exterior of a future king, he was just a son losing his father. "He'll know you were here," she said gently. William nodded, his gaze drifting toward the bedside table. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to the envelope. "Something your father wanted me to keep safe," she replied. "That's all you need to know for now." He frowned. "For now." She didn't answer. Instead, she placed the envelope inside her coat pocket and straightened her shoulders. "Go sit with him. He'd like that." William hesitated, then obeyed. As she left the room, she heard his quiet voice behind her. "I love you, Dad," he said softly. "We'll be okay." But Anne knew better. Down the corridor, she paused near the window overlooking the gray hills. Her reflection stared back at her, weary but resolute. She had carried royal secrets all her life, but none like this. This was the one that would define her, and possibly destroy them all. As the first light of dawn crept over the castle, She whispered the words she couldn't bring herself to say aloud in front of her brother. "It should have been simpler," she murmured. "But it never is it?" Then, slowly, deliberately, she pulled the crimson-sealed letter from her pocket and broke the seal. The wax cracked with a soft pop that echoed louder than thunder in her ears. She unfolded the parchment and began to read. Her face went pale. The words were simple, direct, and final. "My crown, my duty, my legacy. All of it belongs to the one who was never meant to wear it. If he returns home and walks this path alone, then let him be my redemption." Anne's hands trembled. She reread the final line over and over, her eyes blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Because now she understood what Charles had done. He hadn't merely named a successor, he had rewritten destiny. And what came next would tear the royal family apart. The silent vigil was over. The storm was about to begin. The moment Princess Anne stepped into the hallway, clutching the open letter against her chest, the castle seemed to breathe differently. The air was heavier, thicker, almost electric, as if the walls themselves understood that something irreversible had just happened. What had once been a royal residence now felt like the center of an earthquake that hadn't yet been felt by the rest of the world. She didn't head to her quarters. Not yet. Her mind raced, spinning through memories of her brother's words, his regrets, his long silences. Each step echoed down the marble hall like a ticking clock. She knew what the letter said. She knew what it meant. But how was she supposed to tell the rest of them? How do you look your family in the eye and tell them that the king's dying wish is to upend the entire line of succession? She stopped halfway down the hall, taking a deep breath. For decades, Anne had prided herself on discipline. Emotion was for others. She was the one who stayed calm when scandals broke, who stepped in when William and Harry's quarrels boiled over, who kept the royal name steady through chaos. But this was different. This was betrayal disguised as love. She unfolded the parchment again, her eyes scanning the lines as if the words might change if she looked long enough. "My crown, my duty, my legacy, all of it belongs to the one who was never meant to wear it." The words were haunting. Not royal, not ceremonial. Personal. And then, the second paragraph. "If he returns home and walks this path alone, then let him be my redemption." Alone, she whispered to herself again, the word cutting like a blade. She folded the letter and slipped it back into her coat pocket, just as the sound of footsteps echoed behind her. She turned and froze. It was Camilla. The queen consort stood a few feet away, her expression unreadable, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I had a feeling you'd open it," Camilla said softly, her voice almost kind. And straightened. "You knew what it said?" Camilla hesitated before nodding. "He showed me the draft weeks ago. I tried to talk him out of it. I told him it would tear the family apart." Anne's tone was sharp. "And yet you let him sign it." Camilla's eyes flashed with quiet frustration. He was the king, and no one tells a king what to do, not even his wife. And took a slow step closer. "You knew this would destroy William. You knew this would put Harry right back into the fire. And you said nothing?" "I said plenty," Camilla replied, her calmness laced with bitterness. "But you know Charles. Once he decides something, there's no changing his mind." And could feel her pulse quickening. So he truly meant it. He wants Harry to take the throne. Camilla's lips tightened. Only if he returns. And only if he divorces Meghan and finished for her. Camilla nodded slowly. He believed that was the only way Harry could ever be accepted again. The silence that followed was suffocating. The two women stood facing each other, each a pillar of different loyalties. And bound by blood and duty. Camilla, bound by love and survival. "He's asking him to sacrifice everything," and said finally. "His family, his life, his peace." Camilla's reply came with a trace of irony. "And isn't that what every monarch does, in the end?" And wanted to argue, but she couldn't. The truth was there, cold and cruel. Every generation of royals had given up something, freedom, love, happiness, for the crown. But Harry had already paid that price once when he walked away. Could he possibly pay it again to return? The questions kept colliding in her mind as she left Camilla standing there, motionless in the dim light. Anne's footsteps carried her down the long gallery of portraits. The faces of monarchs passed staring back at her. She could almost hear them whispering, their judgment echoing off the painted walls. When she reached her office, she closed the door quietly and sat at her desk. She unfolded the letter once more, smoothing its creased edges. Then she reached for a pen and a notepad. If she was going to tell anyone, she had to do it in order, carefully, deliberately. But before she could write a single word, there was another knock at the door. "Come in," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. A young aide stepped inside, his face pale. "Your Royal Highness, there's been an inquiry from the Prime Minister's office. They've heard rumors about the letter." And stomach dropped. "Already?" "Yes, ma'am. The press is also asking for a statement. Someone's leaked that His Majesty wrote something regarding the succession." And closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply. "Thank you. Tell them nothing. Say that all matters of the king's estate remain private until further notice." "Yes, Your Royal Highness." The aide hesitated. "And Prince William has requested to see you immediately. He's in the East drawing room." Of course he was. William was nothing if not direct. When she entered the drawing room a few minutes later, she found him standing by the fireplace, staring into the flames. His expression was distant, but his jaw was clenched tight. "Aunt," he said without turning around. "Is it true?" "Is what true?" she asked, though she already knew. He turned to face her. "That father left something. A message. A letter." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied him, the weight in his shoulders, the exhaustion in his eyes. He was every bit the heir apparent, the perfect prince. But beneath that composure was a man terrified of losing control. "Yes," she said finally. "There was a letter." William stepped closer, his voice rising slightly. "And it says what they're whispering it says?" She hesitated. "William, just tell me," he snapped. "Tell me if my father disinherited me while he was still alive." And held his gaze. "He didn't disinherit you. He made a wish. There's a difference." William laughed bitterly. "A wish? That's what we're calling it now? A dying man's fantasy?" "Don't talk about him like that," she warned, her tone sharp. He looked away, his chest heaving. "I gave up everything for this family. I've done everything he asked of me. And now he wants Harry to take my place." And spoke softly. "He didn't say take your place. He said Harry was the one who could restore the crown's spirit. That's not the same thing." William shook his head. "You don't understand. If this gets out, it will destroy everything. The line of succession, the people's faith, my credibility. We'll be torn apart." Anne's voice lowered. "Maybe that's what needs to happen before anything can be rebuilt." His eyes widened. "You actually believe this madness?" "I believe in my brother," she said quietly. "And I believe he saw something in Harry that the rest of us refused to." William stepped back, his expression turning cold. "Do you have any idea what Harry will do with this?" "He'll use it. Meghan will use it. They'll spin it into some pity story about forgiveness and healing. And the press will eat it up. Maybe," and said, "or maybe it will force him to make a choice that defines who he really is." William looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. Instead, he walked to the window, his reflection flickering against the glass. If father wanted redemption, he should have started with me. And felt a pang in her chest. She had expected anger, but not this depth of hurt. "William." He turned abruptly. "No, I don't want to hear it. You'll do what you think is right, as always. But if this letter sees the light of day, Aunt, and you won't just lose the country, you'll lose me." He brushed past her and left the room before she could reply. The door slammed behind him, leaving Anne alone with the crackling fire and the faint echo of his footsteps fading down the hall. For a long time, she stood there, frozen. Every instinct told her to protect the institution, to keep the letter sealed, hidden, buried. But every heartbeat reminded her of her promise to Charles, to honor his final wish no matter the cost. She walked back to her desk and unfolded the parchment once again. This time, she read the final line slowly, aloud, as if speaking it might make it real. "If he returns home and walks this path alone, then let him be my redemption." Anne's voice broke on the last word. Redemption? For who? For Charles, trying to fix the wounds he'd left behind? For Harry, the lost son trying to find his place again? For William, trapped in a destiny he never chose? The questions circled endlessly. There was no easy answer. And then, the phone rang. The sharp sound sliced through the silence like a blade. Anne hesitated before answering. "Yes." A voice on the other end spoke quickly, nervously. "Your Royal Highness, it's the BBC. They've received a leak. A reporter claims to have seen a document referencing Prince Harry and the throne. They're preparing to go public." Anne's grip tightened around the receiver. "Who leaked it?" "We don't know, ma'am, but the story will break by morning," and hung up slowly, her mind spinning. The timing was too precise. The only other person who knew the letter's contents besides herself and William was Camilla. And suddenly, the pieces began to fall into place, and walked to the window, staring out at the fog-covered lawns. The world outside was still asleep, unaware of the storm brewing behind palace doors. She whispered to herself, her voice low and trembling. So this is how it begins. She turned back to the desk and picked up the letter one last time. Her brother's words gleamed faintly in the candlelight, heavy with meaning and consequence. "The king's final wish," she murmured, "and it's already out of my hands." Somewhere in London, the presses were preparing their headlines. Somewhere across the Atlantic, Harry and Meghan's phones would soon light up with messages they never expected. And within the palace walls, a war of silence had already begun. But what came next would make this leak look like a whisper compared to the roar that was coming. Because once Harry read those words for himself, nothing in the royal family would ever be the same again. The headlines spread like wildfire across every major outlet by dawn. King's secret wish revealed. Harry to take the throne if he returns alone. Those words, bold and merciless, lit a firestorm that neither Buckingham Palace nor Kensington could control. Overnight, whispers became accusations, and speculation became chaos. Commentators argued live on morning television, body language experts dissected old clips of Harry and Meghan, and social media erupted in an avalanche of opinions. Inside Montecito, where Harry and Meghan's mansion sat surrounded by manicured hedges and paparazzi drones hovering like vultures, the atmosphere shifted from serene to suffocating. Harry was sitting in the breakfast room when his phone buzzed with the first alert. Then another. Then dozens. He glanced down at the screen, his expression unreadable at first. But when the words "Harry to take the throne" appeared on the news ticker, his heart seemed to stop. Meghan, entering the room in her robe, froze when she saw the look on his face. "What's wrong?" Harry turned the phone toward her. She squinted at the screen, her eyes narrowing as she read. And then, quietly, she said, "You have got to be kidding me." The article was everywhere. Every detail of the king's supposed letter, every emotional quote, every speculation about conditions of return. The words "he must come alone" appeared in bold, haunting both of them in the quiet Californian air. Meghan placed her coffee cup down slowly. "They're making it sound like he's offering you the crown if you divorce me." Harry didn't respond. He was still staring at the screen, reading it again and again, as if he could find some clue that it wasn't real. But the phrasing, the tone, it felt too personal to be a fabrication. He ran a hand through his hair, the old signs of panic starting to surface. "Anne, it must have come from it." Meghan crossed her arms. "Or William leaked it to humiliate you. He's always wanted to make you look like the reckless one." Harry shook his head. "No, William wouldn't leak something like this. Not about father. This came from inside, someone close to the top." She gave a hollow laugh. "Oh, come on, Harry. There's only one person who benefits from this story getting out, and it's not you." He looked up at her. "Camilla." They both said the name at the same time. Meghan started pacing, her anger simmering. "That woman has always hated me. She wanted me gone from day one. She's behind this, I'm sure of it. And now they're dangling the throne in front of you like bait, hoping you'll take it and cut me out." Harry's voice softened. "It's not that simple, isn't it?" Meghan snapped. "They've turned your father's final words into a weapon. They want you to choose, Harry. And if you don't, they'll make the world believe you already have." He sighed heavily, standing up and walking to the window. The morning sun spilled through the glass, lighting his face in gold and shadow. "He would never ask me to abandon my family." Meghan's voice hardened. "Wouldn't he?" Harry turned sharply. "You think my father would really put that in writing? That he'd ask me to leave my wife?" "I think," Meghan said carefully, "that your family has never accepted that you left them for me. They've never forgiven you. This letter, real or fake, just gives them what they've always wanted. A way to erase me." The air between them thickened. Harry stared at her, his eyes conflicted. For years, she had been his shield, the person who told him he didn't owe the royal family anything. But now, the very world he'd left behind was calling him back, and the call came from his dying father's hand. He finally whispered, "If it's true, I need to hear it from and herself." Meghan frowned. "Harry, don't." "I have to," he interrupted. If this is really father's final wish, I need to know what he meant. Not from the press. Not from the palace. From her. Meghan stared at him for a long moment, her lips tightening. And what if she tells you it's true? What if she confirms every word? Harry hesitated. Then I'll decide what to do. Her voice cracked slightly. And what if your decision doesn't include me? He looked down, unable to answer. That silence was louder than any argument. Meghan's face went pale, the disbelief turning into something darker, fear. Fear of losing control, of being pushed back into the outsider role she'd fought so hard to escape. Later that afternoon, she called her publicist. Within hours, a statement was drafted. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex remain united and devoted to their family. Speculation about personal ultimatums or royal offers is categorically false. But no matter how carefully crafted the words were, the damage was done. The public had already chosen sides. Commentators on British morning shows debated Harry's loyalty. He's torn between love and duty, one said. If the king truly wrote that letter, then it's the biggest constitutional crisis in decades. On American talk shows, Meghan's name dominated headlines. Some called her a manipulator, others a victim. She knew what she was marrying into. One commentator scoffed. You can't walk into the world's oldest institution and act surprised when tradition bites back. But behind all the noise, and sat in her office at Windsor, the letter still on her desk, her phone buzzing every few seconds. Advisors begged her to issue a denial. The palace press secretary demanded she call it misinterpreted fiction, but she refused. She had already lied enough times for the institution. The truth, she decided, had to stand. That evening, as the rain battered the windows, and received a secure call from an unlisted number, she hesitated before answering. Anton. The voice was unmistakable. Harry, she said quietly. He sounded tired, but not angry. Is it true? There was no use pretending. Yes. A pause. Then, softly, he really wanted me to come back? He did, she said. But he wanted it to be your choice. Not a command. Harry's voice broke slightly. And the rest? The condition? And hesitated. He believed you couldn't lead if you weren't free. Free. Harry repeated. You mean without Meghan? And closed her eyes. That's how he phrased it, yes. A long silence followed, and could hear him breathing, steady but shallow. I loved him, Harry finally said. Even after everything. Even after what happened to Mom. Even after how they treated me. I still loved him. I know, she said softly. He knew too. He sighed. Does William know? Yes. And he's not taking it well. I can imagine, Harry said bitterly. He's probably smashing something expensive right now. And allowed herself a faint, dry laugh. He already did. But then her tone softened. Harry, your father wasn't trying to punish anyone. He saw something in you. Something the rest of us missed. Harry was quiet for a moment. And what if I don't want it? The crown. The power. The curse. Then you'll turn it down, she said simply. But you'll do it knowing the truth, not the headlines. The call ended quietly, with no promises, no tears. Just silence. But in Montecito, the silence didn't last. Meghan had been listening from the hallway, her hand over her mouth, her pulse racing. She didn't hear every word, but she heard enough. The king's final wish. The condition. The word alone. When Harry came out of the room, she was waiting for him. Well, she asked. He hesitated. It's true. Her face went still. So that's it then? He really wants you to leave me. He wants me to come home, Harry said quietly. He didn't say I had to leave you. He just said. She cut him off. You think those aren't the same thing? Harry's frustration finally broke through. Meg, this isn't about us. It's about him. He's dying, for God's sake. He just wants to fix what's broken before it's too late. And you think breaking us is how he fixes it? She shot back. He turned away, running his hands through his hair again. I don't know what to think anymore. She stared at him for a long time, then whispered, They're playing you, Harry. They've always played you. He didn't answer, and that silence said everything. That night, as the world debated the future of the monarchy, Harry sat alone in the dark, watching old videos of his father's coronation. Meghan didn't come into the room. The distance between them had never felt wider. And back in London, William watched the same footage from his own study, anger burning behind his eyes. The same crown that was supposed to be his by right was now being dangled before his brother like some test of loyalty. Two brothers. One dying wish. and a decision that would determine not just who wore the crown, but who would survive it. Because the next morning, Buckingham Palace would release an official statement, one that would ignite the biggest royal confrontation of the century. But what came next would make even this look like calm before the storm. The moment the official palace statement went live, the United Kingdom seemed to collectively stop breathing. The statement was brief, measured, polished, and yet dripping with implication. His Majesty King Charles III's private correspondence has been shared without authorization. However, the content reflects His Majesty's personal reflections and his enduring hope for unity within his family. Any future decisions regarding succession will be guided by constitutional process and divine providence. To the public, it sounded diplomatic. To the family, it was a detonator. Because hidden in that calm phrasing was an unspoken truth, the letter was real. The king's final wish had not been denied, only contextualized. For William, that was enough to shatter everything he'd held together. He stood in his private study at Adelaide Cottage, the blinds drawn, the fireplace roaring despite the mild weather. The paper with the statement lay crumpled in his fist. He'd read it at least 10 times, but each time it struck him like a new betrayal. He could practically hear the whispers already. Maybe Charles didn't trust William. Maybe Harry was the better choice after all. The words spun in his mind until anger began to pulse in his veins like wildfire. He threw the paper into the fire and watched it curl, blacken, and vanish. Your father wanted redemption, and had said, redemption? At whose expense? His? He turned abruptly as Kate entered the room, her face calm but pale. She had read the statement too. I heard shouting, she said softly. The children are asking what's wrong. William paced, unable to stand still. It's all unraveling, Kate. Every bit of control we've worked for, gone in a single letter. She approached him slowly. You need to calm down. Losing your temper won't fix it. He spun toward her, his voice sharp. Do you realize what this means? My father practically named Harry as his successor in spirit. Do you know how that looks? To the people, to the press? Kate's expression didn't change, but her eyes flickered with worry. They won't change the line of succession, William. You're still the heir. That's not the point, he snapped. This isn't about legality, it's about perception. People follow the story, not the law. And right now, the story is that the king's dying wish is to replace his eldest son with the prodigal one. He turned back to the fire, running a hand through his hair. He didn't even trust me enough to tell me directly. I had to find out from Anne. And for God's sake. Kate hesitated. Maybe he knew you'd react like this. He shot her a look. Hurt, disbelief, and fury tangled together. React like what? Like a son who just learned his father never believed in him. She didn't answer. The silence was worse than any argument. William sank into a chair, his elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. All my life, I've done everything right. Every speech, every handshake, every bloody photo op. And still, it's never enough. He always saw me as stiff, cold. But what choice did I have? Someone had to hold this family together. Kate sat beside him. Maybe that's why he wrote it. He wasn't rejecting you, William. He was trying to heal something before it's too late. He looked up, eyes sharp. You think this heals anything? It just divides us all over again. Kate sighed softly. Then don't let it. Control the narrative before it controls you. He leaned back, exhaling through gritted teeth. The narrative? That's what this has become now, public relations warfare. My brother walks away from duty, trashes us on television, and now he's suddenly the king's chosen savior? And I'm supposed to sit quietly and smile. Not quietly, she said. Strategically. Her voice was calm but firm. She had spent years mastering the art of royal survival. She understood that silence was sometimes the loudest weapon. Let and have her moment. Let Harry stew. The more noise they make, the more they expose themselves. William didn't respond immediately. He was staring at the portrait above the fireplace, his father in his coronation robes. There was pride in Charles's painted eyes, but now all William could see was distance. He never believed I could be human, he murmured. Not like Harry. Kate's tone softened. You don't have to be Harry. You have to be the king. But her words didn't land. William's mind was elsewhere, spiraling through years of buried resentment. Every headline that compared him to his brother. Every moment Charles praised Harry's spirit. Every memory of Diana's warmth toward her younger son, the one who reminded her most of herself. It wasn't jealousy. It was exhaustion. Decades of trying to prove that being dutiful didn't mean being heartless. And now, his own father's letter had painted him as exactly that. He stood again, pacing near the window. Outside, reporters had already gathered beyond the palace gates, their cameras glinting like predatory eyes. They'll hound me, he said. They'll follow every word, every expression, every breath, looking for cracks. They'll say I'm losing my temper, losing control, losing my father's blessing. Kate's voice was soft but steady. Then don't give them what they want. He turned to her, his voice shaking. I can't stand by while Harry takes advantage of this. You know what he's like. He'll play the victim again, use father's words to paint himself as the misunderstood hero. He'll go on another bloody talk show and cry about forgiveness. Then counter it, Kate said quietly. Speak before he does. William paused. Speak? You mean address it publicly? She nodded. Not directly. Subtly. A statement about unity, about honoring the king's vision without indulging the gossip. You set the tone before he can. For the first time that morning, William's expression shifted from rage to calculation. Kate's words always had that effect. Beneath her soft-spoken demeanor was a strategist who saw the monarchy as a chessboard, and right now, she was protecting their king-in-waiting from checkmate. He nodded slowly. Yes, a statement. Something about continuity, stability, duty, and love, Kate added. People want to see your humanity right now, not your anger. Let them believe you're the one holding everything together while the rest of the family falls apart. William gave a small, humorless laugh. Love. That's rich. But even as he said it, he reached for his phone. Call James, he said. Have him draft something immediately. Kate rose and touched his arm. William, whatever you say next, say it as a son, not a king. He met her eyes, and for a moment, all the fury faded, leaving only heartbreak. I don't know how to be one anymore. That admission hung in the air like a confession. Later that afternoon, while aides scrambled to contain the fallout, William locked himself in his office again. The palace corridors buzzed with speculation. Some claimed Camilla was behind the leak. Others whispered that and had revealed too much. But William didn't care who leaked it anymore. The damage was done. He poured himself a glass of scotch and stared at the letter his aide had printed, the king's words in black and white. He read the final line again. If he returns home and walks this path alone, then let him be my redemption. Redemption, William muttered under his breath. For what, father? For loving the wrong son. The glass slammed down harder than he intended. Amber liquid splashed across the papers on his desk. He didn't bother to wipe it up. A knock at the door broke the moment. Come in, he barked. The door opened just enough for her and to step inside. She looked calm as ever, but her eyes carried a storm. William, she said softly, we need to talk. He didn't turn to face her. There's nothing left to talk about. Don't be childish, she said, her tone clipped. This isn't about you or Harry. It's about what your father wanted. He turned sharply. You mean what you decided to make public? Her jaw tightened. I didn't leak it. Then who did? He demanded. I don't know, she admitted. But it doesn't matter now. What matters is how we respond. William laughed bitterly. We? There's no we anymore, Anton. You made sure of that. Stop it, she said firmly. You're not a child throwing a tantrum. You're the future of this family. Act like it. That cut deep, and she knew it. For a moment, he looked like he might yell again, but then his shoulders slumped. You don't understand, he said quietly. He chose him. After everything. After all the scandals, the interviews, the accusations, he still chose him. Anne's voice softened. He didn't choose Harry over you, William. He chose hope over fear. He believed the monarchy could change, even if it meant breaking tradition. He looked away. Well, it's broken now. She stepped closer, her tone gentler than before. He loved you, William. You were his strength. But Harry was his heart. And a father doesn't stop loving either, even when they hurt him. He didn't respond. His gaze dropped to the fire again, and hesitated, then said quietly, "Don't let your anger turn into your legacy." When she left, the room fell silent except for the fire's crackle. William stared into it for a long time, his reflection flickering in the glass cabinet across the room. His father's crown gleamed faintly in its display case, the symbol of everything he'd been raised to inherit, and everything that now felt uncertain. He whispered under his breath, almost to himself, "If he wants redemption through Harry, then he'll have to get through me first." And somewhere, far away in California, the brother he'd sworn never to speak to again stared out into the ocean, unaware that the next move had already been made. Because William wasn't going to wait for fate to decide the future of the monarchy. He was going to seize it back, whatever it took. But what came next would push the royal feud into a place no one could come back from. The sun had barely risen over Windsor, and already the air was thick with the sound of chaos. Phones ringing, aides rushing, journalists shouting through the palace gates. The story had exploded into something far beyond Anne's control. The king's letter wasn't just news anymore. It was a wildfire consuming the royal image she had spent her entire life protecting. She hadn't slept. She hadn't even changed out of the clothes she'd worn the night before. Sitting in her study, she stared at the fire that had burned low in the grate, the embers pulsing like a heartbeat. She could still hear her father's voice in her head, the way he said her name the night before he'd fallen ill. "Annie, when the time comes, don't let fear decide what truth you tell." Truth. It was such a fragile word. It could heal, but it could also destroy, and she was now realizing that the king's final wish had been both a confession and a curse. She picked up the letter again, her eyes tired but sharp. Each line was etched into her mind. There was no mistaking what Charles had meant. He'd wanted to restore the monarchy not through ceremony, but through sacrifice. And that meant making the hardest request of all, asking his son to return home, but without the woman he loved. The door creaked open, and her secretary, Jonathan Fairchild, stepped in quietly. He was a loyal man, mid-50s, gray-haired, steady. He had served the royal household for decades and had seen it all. But even he looked unsettled this morning. "Ma'am," he said softly, "the media are camped outside again. They're demanding a statement. The Prime Minister's office has also requested clarification." And didn't look up. Clarification on what? Whether the king meant what he wrote. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. They want to know if the words about succession have any constitutional standing. And let out a small, humorless laugh. The Constitution doesn't govern a father's final wish. But the world loves pretending it does. He hesitated. "If I may, ma'am, perhaps we should consider issuing a statement of restraint. Something that suggests unity rather than division." And looked up slowly, her expression cold but calm. "Unity can't be built on lies, Jonathan. Not anymore." He nodded but didn't argue. He'd seen that look before, the same one she'd had after Diana's funeral, after Andrew's scandals, after Harry and Meghan's departure. It was the look of a woman who refused to let emotion cloud her duty, but even and wasn't immune to exhaustion. She rubbed her temples, closing her eyes. "Where's William?" "Still in Windsor, ma'am. He's refused all meetings this morning. The staff say he hasn't left his office. And Harry? He's on a private flight from Los Angeles, due to land in London in 8 hours." And froze, her eyes snapping open. "He's coming back?" "Yes, ma'am. And he's requested a private meeting with you when he arrives." Her heart skipped. So it was happening already. The confrontation, the reckoning she'd dreaded since the moment she broke that wax seal. She rose slowly, walking to the window. Outside, the castle grounds stretched endlessly under a pale winter sun. The frost sparkled like glass, beautiful but cold. For a brief moment, she saw herself as others did. The unbreakable sister, the dutiful daughter, the reliable royal. But inside, she felt like a ghost holding the weight of 1,000 years of family secrets. "Cancel my engagements for the day," she said finally. "I'll wait for him here." Jonathan hesitated at the door. "Ma'am, if I may ask, do you believe he'll come back alone?" And didn't answer right away. She thought of Meghan, the fierce eyes, the the careful words, the charm that was both dazzling and dangerous. Then she thought of Harry's heart, torn between rebellion and regret. "No," she said quietly. "I don't." When Jonathan left, the room fell silent again, save for the distant rumble of reporters outside the gates, and sat down and stared at the portrait of her father that hung on the far wall. Charles, smiling faintly, painted in his early years as Prince of Wales, a man burdened by destiny long before the crown touched his head. "You never made it easy, did you?" she whispered. "Even in death." A knock interrupted her thoughts. This time, it wasn't her secretary, it was Camilla. Anne's jaw clenched. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Camilla stepped in, dressed impeccably in gray, her posture steady despite the storm raging beyond the palace. "You've caused quite a spectacle," she said dryly. "You realize that, don't you?" And gave a faint smirk. "You mean I told the truth?" Camilla's eyes narrowed. "You told half the truth. And half-truths are what destroy families like ours." And rose, crossing her arms. "Don't lecture me about family, Camilla. You've been rewriting royal history for decades. I'm simply refusing to lie anymore." Camilla didn't flinch. "Charles trusted me with that letter because he knew how volatile it was. He wanted it to come out gently, privately, not splashed across every tabloid on earth." Anne's tone turned sharp. "Then maybe you shouldn't have leaked it." Camilla blinked, her voice rising. "You think I leaked it? Who else could have benefited?" And countered. "You wanted to control the narrative before the rest of us could." Camilla exhaled sharply. "For God's sake. And this isn't about power, it's about legacy. If that letter's true, then Charles's entire reign will be remembered for one thing: pitting his sons against each other. Do you really think that's what he wanted?" Anne's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, but only a fraction. He wanted peace, but he didn't know how to find it in life, so he tried to manufacture it in death. Camilla stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Then let the dead rest. Don't turn this into another royal scandal. For once in your life, and think of what's left of this family's dignity." And stared at her for a long moment. Then, quietly, she said, "Dignity isn't built on silence. It's built on truth, and the truth is already out." Camilla's composure faltered. "And when Harry comes back, what happens then? You think the public will welcome him with open arms? You think William will forgive you? You've lit the fuse, and there's no putting it out now." And turned away. "Then let it burn." Camilla's expression hardened. "You always were your mother's daughter. Better that than your husband's shadow," and shot back. The two women locked eyes for a moment too long. Decades of rivalry and unspoken resentment simmering in the air. Then Camilla turned sharply and left, the sound of her heels fading down the corridor, and sank back into her chair, her hands trembling slightly now. The mask of calm she'd worn for days was beginning to crack. For 74 years, she had carried the weight of everyone else's mistakes: her father's guilt, her mother's legacy, her brother's wars, her nephew's drama. She had always been the one who fixed things, the one who never broke. But this time, she wasn't sure she could fix it. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked steadily toward noon. She stared at it, feeling the hours slip through her fingers like sand. Soon, Harry would be here, and she would have to look him in the eye and tell him what his father truly meant. That was the burden. Knowing the truth wasn't enough. You had to decide what to do with it. A flicker of movement caught her attention. Outside, a black car was approaching through the gates, trailed by security vehicles. And stomach tightened. Too early for Harry's flight. She stood, walking to the window. The car stopped, and a tall figure stepped out. William. He was wearing his navy coat, his face set like stone. He walked with the calm precision of a man who had made a decision and didn't plan to be challenged. And turned from the window, composing herself. The door opened a moment later, and William entered without waiting to be announced. "Good morning, Aunt Anne," he said flatly. "I thought we should speak before he gets here." She gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "Go ahead." He didn't sit. "When Harry arrives, you'll tell him to leave." Anne's eyes narrowed. "You don't give me orders, William." "This isn't an order," he said coldly. "It's a warning. If you think bringing him back will heal this family, you're wrong. It'll destroy what little unity we have left." "Unity built on resentment isn't unity," she replied calmly. "It's denial." William stepped closer. "You think you're protecting Father's legacy, but you're not. You're handing it to Harry on a silver platter. He'll use it to turn the world against us, against me. And once that happens, the monarchy will be finished." and met his gaze steadily. If the monarchy can't survive the truth, maybe it deserves to end. He stared at her, stunned. You actually believe that? I believe in honor, she said quietly. And I believe Father wanted his sons to find theirs again, even if that meant breaking tradition. William exhaled sharply and turned away, pacing. You're naive. Harry isn't coming back for forgiveness. He's coming back for control. He'll twist Father's words until they suit his narrative. Maybe, and said, or maybe he'll surprise you. He turned back toward her, his voice low and dangerous. And if he doesn't, and didn't flinch, then I'll carry the blame. I've carried worse. For a moment, they just looked at each other, 2 generations of duty, bound by love and burdened by pride. Finally, William nodded stiffly. You always think you know best.